Luke adjusted his helmet and pressed the rifle against his chest as he moved silently through the city streets. The distant sound of explosions echoed, constantly reminding him of the siege that had dragged on for weeks. Although the buildings around him were still standing, many showed signs of damage from sporadic bombings. The once bustling streets were now almost deserted, with only a few civilians hurriedly seeking shelter or supplies. As he turned a corner, Luke spotted the partially damaged municipal hospital. The imposing facade now displayed cracks and broken windows, but it still seemed to offer temporary refuge. He decided to investigate, hoping to find medical supplies that could be useful for his unit. Cautiously, Luke approached the main entrance, his eyes alert to any suspicious movement. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crunch of glass under his boots. Inside the hospital, the faint light of dawn filtered through the dusty windows, casting unsettling shadows in the empty corridors. Luke advanced methodically, checking each room for useful resources. Then he heard a low, guttural sound coming from a nearby wing. Intrigued and on alert, he followed the noise, his hand firm on the rifle's trigger. As he turned the corner, Luke was confronted with a surprising scene that made him freeze in place. A large tiger, visibly injured and exhausted, was lying on the floor of the corridor. Its bright orange fur was stained with blood, and its breathing was labored. But what truly shocked Luke was the small cub the tiger was protecting, nestled against its body. The adult tiger's eyes met Luke's, conveying a mixture of fear and pleading. In that moment, Luke felt an inexplicable connection with the dying animal and its helpless cub, a spark of compassion igniting in his heart, hardened by the war. Luke hesitated for a moment, his military training clashing with the compassion he felt. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and approached the injured tiger. The animal, too exhausted to react, simply watched as Luke knelt beside it. With one last pleading look, the tiger gently pushed the cub toward Luke before closing its eyes for the last time. Luke understood the silent gesture, a final attempt to protect its offspring. Holding the trembling cub in his arms, Luke quickly assessed his situation. The hospital, despite the damage, offered temporary shelter, but he needed to act quickly to ensure the little tiger's survival. Rummaging through the nearby infirmary cabinets, Luke found some clean sheets and a box of powdered milk, not ideal, but it would have to do. He improvised a bed for the cub and prepared a milk mixture using water from his canteen. The following hours were a challenge. Luke divided his time between caring for the cub and searching for useful supplies in the hospital. Every noise put him on high alert, fearing the arrival of enemy soldiers or his own comrades, who might not understand his decision to save the animal. As night fell, Luke found himself speaking softly to the cub, sharing stories of his life before the war, finding unexpected comfort in this unlikely connection. By dawn, Luke realized he had made his decision. He couldn't abandon the cub, but he also couldn't stay in the hospital indefinitely. Carefully, he improvised a sling from a sheet, creating a safe place to carry the little tiger. Gathering the few supplies he had managed to find, Luke prepared to leave the hospital. He looked one last time at the adult tiger's body, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. With the cub secure against his chest, he stepped out to face the war-torn world, now with a new responsibility and an unexpected companion. The days dragged on as Luke and the tiger cub struggled to survive in the besieged city. The siege intensified. The sound of distant explosions became more frequent, and enemy patrols ventured increasingly closer to their hideout. Luke moved cautiously through the devastated streets, his senses sharpened by years of military training. The little tiger, as Luke affectionately called him, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying surprisingly quiet during their dangerous forays in search of food and supplies. One stifling afternoon, Luke found himself cornered in a narrow alley. An enemy patrol was approaching, the sound of their boots echoing menacingly off the concrete walls. With his heart pounding, Luke hid behind a rusty garbage container, pressing Tiger against his chest to muffle any noise. Just as the first soldier was about to turn the corner, a fierce roar split the air. To Luke's astonishment, the mother tiger he thought was dead emerged from the shadows, staggering and bloodied. In a final act of maternal desperation, the tigress lunged at the lead soldier. Her teeth sank into the man's neck, bringing him down with a dull thud. Chaos ensued instantly. The other soldiers, caught off guard, reacted by opening fire wildly. The mother tiger, already weakened by her previous injuries, didn't last long. She succumbed under the hail of bullets, but her sacrifice was not in vain. In the ensuing chaos, Luke seized the opportunity to escape, his heart heavy with gratitude and sorrow. That night, sheltered in an abandoned basement, Luke allowed himself a moment of reflection. The scene of the tigress's sacrifice replayed in his mind, blending with memories of his life before the war, a young veterinary student with dreams of working in a zoo. The irony of his current situation did not escape him. As he fed Tiger with the improvised milk mixture, Luke felt a change within himself. The mother tiger's sacrifice in the presence of the cub had awakened something he thought he'd lost in the brutality of war, a purpose beyond mere survival. This realization strengthened him, preparing him for the challenges that lay ahead. Weeks passed, and Luke and Tiger settled into a routine amidst the chaos of war. The cub grew quickly, gaining strength and vitality with each passing day. Luke watched with a mixture of pride and concern, aware that Tiger's growth would bring new challenges. During his supply runs, Luke began to notice subtle changes in the city's atmosphere. The distant sound of explosions seemed less frequent, and occasionally, he caught fragments of hopeful conversations among the few civilians who still ventured into the streets. One morning, while rummaging through the rubble of an abandoned grocery store, Luke heard the unmistakable sound of planes flying over the city. His heart raced, fearing a new attack, but something was different. Looking up at the sky, he saw leaflets being dropped from the aircraft. With trembling hands, Luke picked up one of the papers floating within reach. The words printed on it made his stomach drop. Keep hope. Help is on the way. The siege will be broken soon. Back at his hideout, Luke found Tiger playing with a frayed piece of rope. The domestic scene contrasted starkly with the reality of the war outside. As he watched the cub, Luke was confronted with a dilemma he had been putting off for weeks. If the siege really was broken, what would become of Tiger? The young soldier knew he couldn't keep a tiger as a pet, but the thought of parting with his war companion caused him almost physical pain. That night, lying next to Tiger, who was sleeping soundly, Luke allowed himself to think about the future for the first time in a long while. He imagined a life after the war, where he could use his experience to help animals like Tiger. Perhaps he could work in a wildlife sanctuary or help rehabilitate animals affected by the conflict. With these comforting thoughts, Luke drifted off to sleep, his hand resting protectively on Tiger's soft fur. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for the first time in months, Luke felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The days that followed were a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Luke knew the breaking of the siege was imminent, and with it would come the need to say goodbye to Tiger. The cub had grown visibly, its movements more agile, and its behavior more independent. As he watched the tiger explore the surroundings of their hideout, Luke felt the weight of the decision that was coming. He knew that as painful as it would be to release Tiger into the wild, it was the only right choice. Finally, the moment arrived. Allied troops broke the siege, and the city began to come to life again. Realizing that his time with his companion was coming to an end, Luke took Tiger to the forest on the outskirts of the city. They walked together in silence, the soldier fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. When they reached a clearing, Luke knelt beside Tiger, stroking its head one last time. "You're going to be okay, boy," he murmured, trying to convince both himself and the animal. With one last look, Tiger seemed to understand. He slowly walked away, hesitating briefly before disappearing into the trees. Luke stood still, watching as the animal moved away, his heart heavy with the farewell. The loneliness he felt as he watched Tiger leave was overwhelming, but he knew he had made the right choice. Returning to the city without the cub was one of the hardest experiences of his life, but he found comfort in the hope that Tiger would find his place in the wild. Back in the city, Luke tried to resume his normal life, but the absence of Tiger was like a constant shadow in his mind. He threw himself into the work of rebuilding, trying to fill the void left by the separation. But even in the midst of the hustle and bustle of reconstruction, his thoughts always returned to the Tiger. Luke knew that life would go on, but a part of his heart would always be in the forest with his war companion. Years had passed since the siege on the city had ended. The war, though left behind, still deeply scarred the ruins of the devastated city. Luke, now part of a reconstruction team, worked tirelessly to restore the buildings that had been destroyed. Among them, the old hospital, where so many painful memories were etched. As the reconstruction efforts intensified, Luke and his team were assigned to recover the municipal hospital, the same place where he had found the injured Tiger years before. During one of the site inspections, while walking through the nearly unrecognizable corridors, Luke noticed something unusual. Amidst the rubble, he saw a subtle movement, a shadow that seemed alive. His heart raced as he recognized the orange and black stripes standing out against the gray concrete. It was the Tiger, now much older, but still imposing. As he cautiously approached, he realized that the Tiger was not alone. Hidden in the shadows, nestled beside the mother, were her cubs. Luke knew that the Tiger and its cubs would need to leave before the reconstruction of the hospital intensified. He couldn't risk the safety of the workers or that of the Tiger and its new family. Carefully, he approached the animal, his movements slow and deliberate. The Tiger's eyes followed Luke's every step, but there was no aggression in its gaze, only a silent understanding. Luke knew that the Tiger trusted him, and that trust obligated him to do what was best for everyone. As Luke approached, he noticed small cubs hidden in the shadows, nestled close to their mother. The Tiger had created new life in the ruins of that hospital, turning a place of pain into a temporary home. Luke looked at the cubs, feeling a mixture of joy and sadness. He whispered reassuring words, promising the Tiger that she and her cubs would be safe. The animal seemed to understand, its eyes remaining fixed on Luke's. Knowing that the presence of the reconstruction team would make the situation untenable, Luke took a step back, encouraging the Tiger to move to a safer location. The animal observed him for a moment as if saying goodbye to Luke one last time, and then with a low roar, called her cubs. They emerged from the shadows reluctant, but following their mother as she began to move away from the hospital. Luke watched them disappear into the nearby forest, feeling that this was the final farewell. When the last cub vanished among the trees, Luke stood silently, reflecting on everything that had happened. He knew he had made the right decision, even if it meant another goodbye. Life would go on, and the Tiger and her cubs would find a new home far from the turmoil of humans. Luke felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had helped ensure the survival of that family, just as he had done years before. He turned and walked back to the hospital, ready to begin the reconstruction, but carrying with him the memory of his wild friend.